If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah.
In fact, the fact is, Israelites, our people, our tribes, actually have a big part of history that plays out there, both in the in the modern, not even modern, like in the, how would you say, like recent historical sense and ancient historical. So we're gonna get actually like straight into it. There's a lesson that True Nation did with the blessed Bishop Yaziquel in Georgia. He actually just did a lesson on the tribe of Dan. It's called "Where is Dan?" So I definitely advise you guys all to watch that lesson. It's very informative, and it's actually part of what allowed this lesson to come up today as well too. So oddly enough, or interesting enough, that's the first person we're going to talk about. We're actually going to talk about that particular tribe, the tribe of Dan. So not to go pretty much into what Bishop Yaziquel was speaking about, but the tribe of Dan, they forsook their inheritance to go leave, essentially. And part of those places that they left to happened to be around Europe, around the Mediterranean, but context clues, putting things together, Europe was one of the places that the tribe of Dan went to very, very early on. We can read about this in first the book of Judges. So actually, let's go to let's go to the book of Joshua. Go to Joshua chapter 19 and verse 47. Start from right there. And if we got to jump up earlier before that verse, I'll let you know. But yeah, so this time frame, understand this. So what we're about to bring out, this is back in 1300 or 1300 BC. 1300 years before Christ is when we first begin to see Israelites going their way or beginning to make their way to Europe, amongst other places in the world. But our focus tonight, obviously, is Europe. So read that in Judges chapter 5 and verse 17. Joshua, excuse me. Joshua chapter 5. No, 19 and 47. I'm sorry. I'm switching up verses. We're going to get to Judges secondly. But Joshua 19 and 47 first.
Joshua chapter 19 and verse 47. And the coast of the children of Dan went out too little for them. Therefore the children of Dan went up to fight against Leshem.
So pause there real quick. So this is the book of Joshua. Towards the end of it, this is when the Most High is finally giving the land inheritance to all the tribes of Israel. So at this particular point, Dan didn't even get all of their inheritance, but they just desired and wanted more. So what they did was they were forward, and forcefully went to other parts, within, the land that we were allotted to get land for themselves. So read on with that verse.
And took it and smote it with the edge of the sword, and possessed it, and dwelt therein, and called Leshem Dan, after the name of Dan, their father.
Khan. So if you guys want to check out a Bible map, get you a nice little Bible atlas. This is the Oxford Bible Atlas, but you can Google these things. Dan's original inheritance was actually in the whole 12 tribe charts, in the time of Judges and Joshua, they were right next to Judah. So they were very southern initially in the time of the land allotment. But right here in this scripture, when they were not satisfied with just that, they went further north. To the northernmost parts of all Israel, and dwelled in the land of Bashan in a particular city called Laish. Now, this matches up with the prophecy that's given to Dan in Deuteronomy chapter 33, where it says that Dan is a lion's whelp, and from Bashan he shall leap. That particular reason why it's Bashan is because this place right here, Leshem, that is in Bashan, the land of Bashan. I'm going to show my fellow Deacon right here on the map too, so he's not lost. And you guys too, definitely, pull out your atlases while we, stalling, kind of talking about stuff. But Bashan is right here. Dan originally was supposed to be there. This is where they decided to take more land from. And go to Deuteronomy chapter 30. We're gonna bring that out. Deuteronomy chapter 33. And I want to explain some stuff to you too, inspired by our beloved Bishop Taziwan. He loves to watch Animal Planet, and he loves to watch the natures of animals. And if you know the natures of animals, which most of us in captivity don't, you'll start to understand and see some of the parables that the Most High attributes to us as a people, to the certain natures of other peoples in the world, and even prophetic reasonings for us. So I'm going to talk about this briefly real quick too. Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 22.
Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 22. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan.
Now this is important, and again, I'm very grateful for the lesson that Bishop Yaziquel did, because he explained what this meant, and I didn't know for the longest time. But if you know how lions work and their prides, pretty much the top alpha lion, once he's established himself, when his kids that are sons are of a certain age, I believe they say like 3, he actually exiles them. That's how lions work. He exiles and kicks out all the younger males and boys once they reach a certain mature age for them to go figure it out on their own. And they either become nomads for a time or eventually they go and start their own prides. But this is just a common understanding of how lions work. They kick out all the younger boys, and it's just that male, and then all the females that are along with them, and that's how prides are divided up. So when it's talking about Dan basically, he didn't necessarily get kicked out, but he got himself kicked out, and that's why it says that Dan shall leap from Bashan. He shall leap, or as he's going to leave, just like a lion cub, a lion's whelp. That's what a cub is. A lion's whelp is a young lion, basically. So he left, and he left by this way. Go to Judges chapter 5 and verse 17. So that was the prophecy against Dan, and he decided to leave in a certain direction that is going to lead to Europe. But we're going to prove that with scriptures. Judges chapter 5 and verse 17.
Gilead abode beyond Jordan. And why did Dan remain in ships?
So why did Dan remain in ships? If you know anything about the landmass of Israel, Israel is just east of the Mediterranean Sea. So Dan was a merchant of sea. He remained in the ships because that was his job. He was a merchant. He did seafaring and such like that. You can continue that verse. Judges 5 and 17.
Gilead abode beyond Jordan. And why did Dan remain in ships? Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches.
So not going too much into the details of it, but Dan basically forsook not only their land inheritance, but they basically forsook the Most High ultimately, and they decided to do their own thing and be not under the authority, essentially, of the Most High. Because you learn about their history in Judges, you see the whole tribe of Dan was very idolatrous, which is the worst sin. Above homosexuality, above stealing a person, idolatry is the sin that the Most High hates the most. And that's why they don't even have a gate in the book of Revelations. But check out Bishop Yaziko's lesson on all that. Go to Ezekiel chapter 27 and verse 19. So I want to explain to you why, according to the scriptures, they're in Europe and not anywhere else. And it's according to this. 27 and 19, yes, sir.
Ezekiel chapter 27 and verse 19. Dan also and Javan, going to and fro, occupied in thy fairs. Bright iron, cassia, and calamus were in thy market.
So this is the reason why did Dan remain in ships that we just read about in Judges 5 and 17. This is what he was doing. He was more interested in his business and getting, his material and wealth gains more than, serving the Most High and being within Israel. So he decides to do business with Javan, which is the Greeks, which are descendants of Japheth. And whether, Esau, Edomites were there at that time, because again, this is like 1300 BC to about 600 BC, whether Esau was there or not, in the most part, I mean, it doesn't matter. Esau was there, but it says with Javan. So he was doing business again with the Greeks, which are the descendants of Japheth. So Dan, he left his place, and that's where he began to settle over towards in Europe. So that's one aspect and reasoning why the diaspora is in Europe. And we're going to actually further that a little bit later on in the lesson. So remember this, talking about Dan. Remember this, because we're going to come back to this and revisit it. But we got to get a general understanding of why Israelites are even diasporaed in Europe. Go to the book of Second Maccabees. No, actually, before we go to Second Maccabees, no, let's do that. Second Maccabees 12 and 19. Second Maccabees 12 and 19. Oops.
the book of 2nd Maccabees, chapter 12 and verse 19. Howbeit, Dositheus and Sosipater, who were of Maccabees captains, went forth and slew those that Timotheus had left in.
Hold that real quick. My bad. First Maccabees, not second Maccabees. Tripping on my notes. First Maccabees 12 and 19. Sometimes that be happening. Your mind be racing, and you be writing down the wrong thing sometime. But first Maccabees, you guys, excuse me. First Maccabees 12 and 19.
And in this is the copy of the letters which Onias sent. Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, to Onias the high priest, greeting. It is found in writing that the Lacedaemonians and Jews are brethren, and that they are of the stock of Abraham.
So right here, we have a pretty famous passage in Scripture that ties in historically the understanding of the Spartans, pretty much. The Lacedaemonians are basically another word for the Spartans in Greek or in Greece. And again, we just read about that Dan was doing business with Javan, which are the Greeks. So these people that are the stock of Abraham, that this is a letter written by Jonathan, who was, and this is about 800 years down the line, because Jonathan lived in the time of the Maccabees, which was, 200 years before Christ, 200 BC. So we got like a 900-year difference between when Dan initially left to do business with Javan and the Greeks, and then now these people here suddenly, why are these people of the stock of Abraham? How do we know this? Because of the diaspora and Dan in particular. Read on.
Verse 22. Now therefore, since this is come to our knowledge, ye shall do well to write unto us of your prosperity. We do write back again to you, that your cattle and goods are ours, and ours are yours. We do command, therefore, our ambassadors to make report unto you on this wise.
So this is Jonathan, making his treaties to get support from not only the other nations, but our own people. And it's not going to tell you right here that these were Danites, but these are the things that you got to put and piece together. These Lacedaemonians definitely are a descendant of Dan leaving his inheritance in Israel to go do whatever he wanted to do on the seafaring business with the other nations, and Javan in particular. So that's one ancient example of how the diaspora made it to Europe. Let's go to a second point. The Assyrian captivity, the Assyrian or the Persian captivity, which was in 700 BC, 700 years before Christ. This is the big one that everybody knows about. This is like this is the expulsion of the 10 tribes. Hopefully everybody knows about this. But go to 2 Kings chapter 17. Matter of fact, go to 2 Kings chapter 17 and verse 1. Yes, sir.
2 Kings chapter 17 and verse 1. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents.
So read this whole chapter for yourself. In it, 20 verses down, it gives you the history of how the 10 tribes eventually got expelled from their land. But Dan, if any remnant was left, he definitely got taken out with them, but Dan was already gone. He already had left. Even before this, in chapter 16, verse 29, we see that early on, there was already a small portion, a remnant of the northern area of the 10 tribes that got expelled. So all of these things are the reasons why. And Asia Minor is still considered Europe too. Asia Minor is how would we say this today? Basically, if you know where Greece is, where Greece and Rome is, Italy, and then like the Greek islands, just a little bit more to The east is where Asia Minor is, which is the smaller part of Asia. It's basically next to Russia, you know? And that's where a majority of the 10 tribes, you know, were stationed, as far as even going more east to like India and stuff like that. Now go to the book of Esther, chapter 1 and 1. So this is a different captivity about another 100 years down the line from the Assyrian to the Persian and Mede. And you'll see how big the empire was at this point. And it gives you, it literally would tell you. So let's get that, Esther 1 and 1. And that's important to understand because in every province of the empire, wherever it was, and in this particular time in Esther, she actually sent letters to where anywhere where the Jews were that knew who they were and were keeping God's commandments, she sent letters to them to warn them against the oncoming onslaught by Haman, exactly. Haman was second in command of the king of the Persians and Medes, and he wanted to kill all Israel. So Esther had to send letters to anywhere in any of the provinces of the Persian and Mede Empire. She had to send letters to them to warn them. And this is how far it extended. And it only gets bigger as the Greek and the Roman captivities, you know, come up. And even the whole American captivity modern day. As empires keep growing and taking over each other, they just get larger, and our people just get scattered further and further. Read that, though.
You said Esther 1 and 1? Yes, sir. Esther 1 and 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces, that in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants.
That's enough. That's all you get. I just want you guys to understand that the Persian and Mede Empire was from Ethiopia, the same Ethiopia that you know today, to India. That's basically East Africa to West Asia, or where India is at. So that's how big the provinces were at that time. And Esther had to send letters to wherever the Jews were at between all of that. And then, coming to our third point, the Hellenization period. Go to 1 Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 10. The Hellenization period. This is now from the Assyrian and Persian and Mede captivity. This is about 500 years now later in the future from the past, if that makes sense to you guys. Again, 200 BC. That's the Hellenization period of Judea. So again, the 10 tribes at this point in time, they're all gone. I mean, those that knew, you know, who they were and what they were doing, they're all gone. They're already scattered in the provinces. And as a matter of fact, by this time, they had already made their way to the Americas anyway, the vast majority of them. But this is what we have to deal with, understanding who the Greeks are and where Greece is. Read 1 Maccabees 1, 10 and 15.
1 Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 10. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes.
Khan, if you read the first chapter, you know we're talking about the root of Alexander the Greek, or Alexander the Great. Out of his root came this man Antiochus. So he was still a product of the Greek nation and empire ultimately. And this is what they decided to do.
Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus, the king who had been in hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, saying, Let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinance of the heathen. Whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem, according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief.
Khan, sold to do mischief, and just sold in general, because this is what one of the curses says. Every time that we sin and we mess up to the will of the Most High, he says, I'm going to scatter you and make you serve your enemies. anywhere and everywhere where they may be. At this particular time, the Most High said, all you Israelites that want to go and make a covenant, I mean, you're already basically selling yourselves, but I'm also going to sell you, and you're going to go dwell amongst these Greeks now. So again, you have the Hellenization of Israelites, another layer that are now a diaspora because they wanted to be so, dealing with the Greeks, both in their own land, but, you know, moving and such and making that covenant as well. Stay in that chapter and jump to verse 41 through 43.
Chapter 1 and verse 41. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath.
Now jump to verse 53.
Verse 53. And drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee for succor.
So now you have a diaspora on many levels. Just on this third point with the Hellenization, you got Israelites that willingly sold themselves to go do and dwell with the Greeks, you know, and the heathen. And then you have Israelites that were in secret and had to leave because heathen, the Greeks in particular, were in the land and killing anybody that was keeping Yahweh's laws. So they had to flee in secret to various places, Asia Minor or whatnot and what have you. So again, this is how Israelites became scattered in what we understand to be Europe. Even just north of Israel, what is Turkey and stuff like that. Modern day today is like Turkey, you know, formerly in the past, like the Ottoman Empire. Those are still places, Asia Minor is still considered to be Europe. Even if they're not specifically in, you know, like Wales or England and stuff like that, or Denmark, and not yet, you know. This is still the scattering of Israel in Europe, even if it's Eastern Europe. I'm going to read this too, so you don't have to jump there. But again, Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 64. And Yahweh shall scatter thee among all people from the one in the earth even to the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods that we willingly wanted to do or forcefully were forced to do, and neither that thou nor thy father even wood and stone. So again, the Hellenization period is part of the reason why Israelites and Jews, Judeans in particular, found themselves within Europe. So we're getting closer to the modern aspect. Point 4, the New Testament. You guys should know where I'm going with this. Acts, the Acts of the Apostles. Who was the main actor of the apostles, at least as far as what we have textually? Paul. Now, all the letters that Paul wrote, most of them that he wrote that we have at least, guess where these were letters to? These were letters to places in Europe. And we're gonna fire them off. We're gonna fire them off for you. So let's not getting into any particular verse, but what is the first book after Acts? Romans. Where is Romans at? Rome, exactly. That's Italy. That's the peninsula just west of the Greece peninsula. So the Italian peninsula. This is a letter written to a church of Christ-following Israelites in Rome. That proves the diaspora in Europe. Let's go to the next book. Corinthians. Corinth. 2 letters to Corinthians. Guess where Corinth is at? Europe, exactly. It's in Europe. So we got another letter by Paul to the Corinthians, which is in Europe. Firing them off, going on again. Yeah, we're not going to read no verses from them. This is Israel still. That's not Europe. Yeah, I got you right now. This is Asia Minor right here. This is Europe. That's Greece. So you can look at that. Yeah, I mean, again, we don't have no slides to show you guys, but you guys can very easily, I mean, you guys have your Bibles with you. You should be able to look up for Romans, where is Roman at? Where's Corinth at? Where is the next book? Galatia. Galatia is literally like dead center Asia Minor. That's like the biggest Asia Minor region in there. So he wrote a letter. Paul wrote a letter to them as well too. You know, and the list goes on to the Colossians and the Ephesians, even the Philippians. So again, these are all places that in the time of Christ, Paul wrote his letters to the diaspora, to not only just the Jews that knew who they were at this time, but also to those Gentiles, those Israelites that forgot who they were, those Israelites like Dan that had been there, those Israelites like the Hellenized Jews that made the choices and the decisions that they made 200 years prior. They're still there. Not those ones, you know, that made the decision, but their descendants and their sons that eventually was like, nah, we want to serve and seek the true and living God. That's why these letters were made by Paul. And with that being said, too, the legacy of Paul, the legacy of the apostles of the first century, you know, everything right after Christ was put to death in like the 30th year of the first century, we have a term that's called Sephardic. The Sephardic Jews. The Sephardic Jews, they lived in Spain or Iberia and Portugal. Now, this is a real phrase you can look up. The Sephardic Jews were basically just Jews that lived in Sephardi, which means Spain. So that's all that it means. When you hear Sephardic, it just means Jews of Spain. And they had been living there as far as Christians are concerned, you know, Christianity, the real Christianity, since the 4th century. And that's basically right after or before the fall of the Roman Empire, where we have Jews there. Now, again, we don't have any specific letters from Paul in the New Testament, but you best believe that not only Paul, but all the other early church fathers from, what's his name? Onias, and there's a couple other early church fathers that I can't recall their names at the moment. But if you do your research, you know, the 1st century early church fathers, these are the people that helped to prosper the gospel. And they were living in churches of Jews were also living in Spain, which is why we have the understanding of the Sephardic Jews. And again, these were black peoples, you know, black peoples of different varying shades of brown, and I'm sure hair texture because of the scattering and the mixing, but Israelites by blood nonetheless, you know. Just don't let, you know, your Renaissance and your modern day Europeans tell you, because just a little tidbit, the Renaissance period is when this understanding of the scattering of Israelites and even just dark-skinned peoples in general, you know, Japhetic or not, occupied and lived Europe. But again, European history today, Caucasian history tells you today that Europe was always white, you know, and Edomite and stuff like that. But that's not true according to history. Moving a little bit forward. So now, after the main acts of the apostles, particular Paul, we have what's known as the destruction of Jerusalem, or even really the destruction of Judea, period. This is between 70 AD to 73 AD. This is when books like From Babylon to Timbuktu, right, books like that were written. So what happened was Jewish revolt, all the different sects of Jews, not even Christians, because Christians were just trying to, you know, stay in line and stuff like that, but be righteous. But the Jews themselves, between like the Zealots and the Sicaries, and I'm sure the Pharisees and some other different Jewish sects, they decided to rebel and revolt against Roman authority, and that's what got them, us, our forefathers, removed completely. And part of that removal, the biggest part, was going into Africa, northern Africa, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, all of that. That's when we made our way. That's when we began making our way into North Africa. So this is, again, around 70 AD. And for some time, for about Another 600 years, we maneuvered and moved ourselves within Africa, eventually making our way to West Africa, where the transatlantic slave trade is known to be done. But before we're not even touching upon that. Before the transatlantic slave trade, guess what there was? There was the Arab slave trade, and also the Arab conversion of Israelites, Jews, Gentiles, of the like, to Islam. So the rise of Islam and their forced conversion of Israelites and Jews to Islam led to the term that we all know of. What is it? The Moorish Science Temple, what we have right here, like just up the block, the Moors. Moor meaning dark skin, because that was the people that the Islamics converted. Our people, we were dark-skinned people, and that's why we began to be known as Moors. And guess what the Moors are known for? The Moors are known for, along with the Arab taskmasters and us under them, the Moors were known for invading Spain, where the Sephardic Jews were, and taking over Spain, for some time. This was around 700 AD, 700 years after Christ, is when the Moors began to, Israelite Moors began to take over a part of Europe, Spain in particular, and other places as well too. So again, putting the puzzle pieces together of the differing factions and diaspora of Israelites in particular, just in Europe, from again, the Lacedaemonians to these Moors and these Sephardic Jews up in Spain. But that's not it, That's definitely not it. We're going to come, I want to touch back now on Dan again, too. So this is not something that we can particularly point out directly in scriptures, but it's like you see it when you're reading it in the spirit. And when you see the way that Dan moved back in 1300 BC, you see how it relates to some of these Vikings. Now the Vikings existed. Their reign was like 800 AD, 800 years after Christ, to about 1000 AD, 1,000 years after Christ. That's when they're big. That's when they're historically written about. And the Vikings is not, they say, monolithic. It's not just like all one peoples. The Vikings were many peoples, and Israelites were actually part of that too. And what not the theory, but the understanding is that Dan was a part of that. And we're gonna talk about that. So, have you guys ever heard of a place called Denmark? The place Denmark is noted to be named from Dan, the tribe of Dan. Denmark, and the people that lived in Denmark were the Danes or the Danites. If you understand linguistics and how languages kind of like evolve over time, you can see these connections right here. So these Danish people from Denmark, and Denmark still exists where it's at today. Denmark is basically by Sweden. So if you look on the map of Europe, if you want to start first with England, Denmark or Sweden, stuff like that, is a little bit more east of the British Islands, and that's where you're going to find modern day Denmark. So again, the time period right now is like 800 AD, 800 years after Christ. So these Danish people, they're described to be a seafaring and raiding people. Vikings. If you don't know anything about Vikings, that's some of the things that they did. They were seafarers, and they went up to people in the raid. Now, something about Dan. What did we just talk about? Dan went up with ships and didn't come back with ships in Judges and Joshua with Javan. And guess what they did? They wanted more land, so what did they do? They went and took up Lachish and Bashan. They forcefully destroyed the people of Lachish and raided them and forced their name there. These are the same attributes and characteristics that we see with these Danish people, about 2,000 years later, doing the same thing. amongst other peoples as well too, because we're going to get more into the history, a little bit more into the history of it. But again, Denmark is the peninsula island next to England, so it deals with being in the waters pretty much. That's why they were seafarers. Notable people or notable Danish people that you want to look up. I'm going to spell it for you. I'm going to name it first, though. Geirmund Heljarskin. That's spelled Geirmund. Last name, Heljarskin. Geirmund Heljarskin. This is a person that's known to be a black Viking. Another man, Halfton the Black. That's Hafton the Black. He was known to be a black Viking from Denmark. And another man named Memnon, Memnon. These were notable faces in the 8th century that were known to be described as black Vikings. The further details goes with this. Let me read this. 2 people that confirm this. A historian named Thomas More. Easy to spell. Thomas More. Like Thomas the train. He has a book. It's called More's History of Ireland. This is written in 1835. 1835 years after Christ's death. That's when this book is written. And in this book, he confirms through words that there is a specific Viking people that came from Denmark, and they described them as Dubgal. No, this is Irish. I'm speaking Irish right now. The Irish word Dubgal literally means dark-skinned. So again, this is a historical source from Thomas More in his book that he's writing the history of Ireland, and the Irish people basically said in their history, there was a people, the Vikings, that came from across the sea, and they came and raided and pillaged our land. And there were 2 types of them. There was a dark-skinned one, the Dubgal, and then there was the light-skinned one. So look, in case any light-skinned people, Edomites, watch this lesson, no, we're not culturally appropriating what you think the history is, but guess what? There was not only just white or light-skinned Vikings. Again, there were black Vikings too. And that's history that you guys intentionally left out and don't teach the rest of the world, you know? And these are things that we just got to let you know. And more important, because now we're seeing the ties to them being Israelites. And again, that's not to justify the things that they did, because the tribe of Dan was so wicked back then that they don't even get a gate. They don't even get a gate in the kingdom to come. They're still Israel, and they can still live with us, but they're not in a rulership. So these Viking Israelites, yes, they were pagan for sure. They were pagan. They worship other gods and other idols and stuff like that. But, I mean, didn't all the tribes of Israel at one point, we're all coming back to repentance. But these Vikings, some of the Vikings are Israelites. The Danish people from Denmark, and in particular. So again, reading these historical sources. Another one, a man named Georges Louis Buffon. This is a Frenchman, a French naturalist. And in his book, he describes a word that you should be very familiar with. It's Latin. It's called Niger. And Niger is described as being a dark-skinned people. And guess what? The history of England, the English people, British, the Welsh people that live there, they have a similar account just like the Irish. There was a seafaring people that came, and they came over and raided and pillaged and took over, our land. And guess what they looked like? They were dark-skinned. They described as Nigers. These were Danites. These were these were literally Danites, our Danish people, but these were Israelites. This was the tribe of Dan coming over in Europe doing this. Now, again, not every dark-skinned European, or light-skinned for that matter, is an Israelite, but we have narrowed it down to be like, yeah, these people that claim this land did the same thing that they was doing 2,000 years ago. When Dan called Lachish Dan after the name of their fathers, they did the same thing. They claimed Denmark. When they invaded Ireland, guess what they called? if you guys don't know, there's I think it's a major city in Ireland. It's called Dublin. What did we just talk about what dub meant? Dub or Dougal meant dark skin. So Dublin, that's the history of Ireland. They're letting you know right there. That history is originally the Vikings or Danish Vikings came over and took over Ireland, and they called it Dublin, or the dark skins, basically, because they took over. Amongst, the lighter skin Vikings as well, too. But we're not even focused on them. We're not worried about them. We're talking about Israelites. So yeah, just to get more into the Irish words, again, Dubgal, that meant the dark-skinned ones. And then Fingal, that meant the light-skinned ones. So again, do your research on this, on these particular words. I'm dropping them as gems for you guys to go investigate further. But again, the Danish people from Denmark is very easily associated to be the Danites that originally that leaped from Bashan, as the prophecy would say, a long time back, and found themselves dwelling with the Greeks and just dwelling in Europe, period, eventually becoming the Vikings. And crazy enough, just as crazy enough as West Africans under Mansa Musa made their way over to North America and the Americas where the 10 tribes were, they say that the Vikings, and I'm sure these Danites, because they were the main seafarers, Israel is the salt of the earth, they made their way to the Americas too. So it's a lot of history that's not, at least as far as us in America, there's a lot of history that's revised and not taught to us correctly. But guess what? Now your concept of Vikings should not be whitewashed, because guess what? Black people have lived in the cold. Black people can survive in the cold and have lived in the cold, and it's a thing. It's just not a normal thing for us in America, basically. Man. And with that, you guys, let me see. Now that's as modern as history goes, because again, too, after the Renaissance period, which is, Christopher Columbus, 1492 and all that, that's when this process started to happen for everything, literally everything that wasn't white, not only just Israelites, but this is what happened. Go to the book of 1 Maccabees. 1 Maccabees, chapter 3 and verse 48. This is why there's so much debate and division and miseducation on true history, because this is what the other nations and Esau, white people in particular, did to the world, and what we're a part of too. We live in this world too. Read that.
1 Maccabees, chapter 3 and verse 48. And laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images.
That's what it is. This is why you don't associate Vikings, at least partially, with black peoples or Israelites in period, because white people have indoctrinated you through television, novellas, books, comic books, memes, the internet, all with their images of, and that's not to say Israelites can't be light-skinned sometime, but that's mainly a genetic trait that belongs to Esau. They've indoctrinated the whole world with this understanding that the Vikings or Europeans in general, black people don't live there. Black people only live in hot places. They only live in Africa and the Middle East. They can't survive. They wouldn't want to be in Europe where it's snowing, and that's not true. Israelites are scattered all over the whole world, and then Esau is the only nation on the earth that is a red man anyway. Like red, like light skin red. Even Japheth is a brown skin of some degree nation of people, that lived in Europe originally. That's their inheritance. But that's why a lesson like tonight has to get taught, because of issues like this. Our enemies, Esau in particular, has painted the images of himself and taught our story with him in it as the main character. And that's just That's just not true. But that's Babylon. That's the confusion that we live in this modern day. The whole world is one kingdom. It ain't no secret. You know, this whole world is an empire, and it's gonna fall, and rightfully so, because the truth is definitely coming out. Go to the book of Psalms. Just get to the book of Psalms. I'm gonna get you the specific chapter. I just want to, since I mentioned that, I want to get this for you guys. Go to the book of Psalms and the earth help the women. That's the precept I'm looking for right now, and that has a Psalms precept I want to get you guys. Go to Psalms 85 and 11. When we do these world history lessons, this is the spirit of this scripture that we're bringing out. You know, everything from anthropology books to rocks and archaeology and everything in between. This is the spirit of why I do world history with True Nation, is to bring this out.
Psalms chapter 85 and verse 11. Truth shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness shall look down from heaven. Yea, the Lord shall give that which is good, and our land shall yield her increase. Righteousness shall go before him, and shall set us in the way of his steps.
And that's truth to the max degree. So guess what? We have a brother now that's in I believe South London. Guess what? Utilize this lesson and don't let nobody tell you any other, Israelite or otherwise, you know, because it's not, you're not any less of a person just because you're a black man or a Native American man or a Latino man or an Israelite man that lives in Europe. That doesn't make you a chocolate-covered Edomite or otherwise. And with that, you guys, we're going to say shalom.
If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really living. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was, if it wasn't for